have some questions for you. We have an interview series called The Medicine Cabinet that we've been interviewing with healers and authors and speakers in the wellness space. And I'm excited about launching the new WordPress site. We decided to expand who we're speaking to through the lens of wellness and healing. And I thought of you literally like last week.
You must have sent me some signals.
Yeah, no, we were totally picking up in the ether on each other. And I was just like, oh, it would be so cool to have one of the, launching articles include you to talk about your wellness and healing experiences, because I don't think I've actually read that much about that side of you. So I hope you're ready for all my questions.
And thank you for the short notice. I'm about to go camping, so I'll be offline, and then when I come back, we'll have a board meeting, and so it's going to be a crazy rest of the month.
Oh, amazing. So where are you right now? Are you in Houston?
I actually switched. I'm in San Francisco, which is remarkably having a really nice and clear day.
Really? Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's good to know. Well, I'm in LA and it's not the case right now.
Oh, well, maybe the winds will make it down there.
Yeah, every time we try to camp, there ends up being a fire there. So I want to talk about your off-grid choice in just a second. One of the ways that we actually start this interview, and forgive me that I'm going to have somewhat of an agenda with this because it's going to be like in clips and like in blog form. But my first question for you is, what is your mood right now? Like, what is your vibe? Where are you at?
My vibe and mood is really great, actually. I had a great morning. I got to read. I did a small workout, and I'm talking to you. So I would say that this has been a very strong start.
Nice. What is your intention for the day?
My intention for the day is around communication. So I have a lot of internal, the company now, Automatic, is over 1,300 people. And there's a lot of, a little bit of a backlog of things I need to catch up with. And so I'm going to do a lot of reading and writing today, which is kind of some of my favorite days.
Oh, I love that, Matt. That's so cool. Well, thank you for that opener. So, we're kind of in a different world in the wellness space. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you, because, I've obviously done research on you even prior to this conversation today. Just even when I came to the Automatic conference last year, I wanted to like make sure I knew who my audience was. And then of course I found out more about you. But the healing world and the wellness world is kind of its own little bubble in a lot of ways. There are millions of healers all over the planet. And then thankfully, the industry that we call wellness today is now becoming more of a mainstream thing. So through that context, I'm really curious if you could just kind of share with our audience a little bit about who you are and how you are at the intersection of wellness or spirituality or not.
Sure.
I want to give you that out.
Yeah. So my name is Matt Mullenweg. I'm born and raised in Houston, but I pretty much live on the internet. I'm a tech guy. I make, well, one would say is I make websites that help people make websites. I try to make tools for creativity. So my company, which is called Automatic, creates WordPress.com, which allows people to publish blogs, websites, etc. WooCommerce, which allows people to sell things online. Now over $20 billion a year of goods are being sold, goods and services being sold through WooCommerce. And also we now run Tumblr, which is a cool social network that we're trying to create a kind of a positive third space for people to connect online, and lots of creativity, lots of wellness on there. That's actually new since we last spoke, I think.
Oh, sweet.
We try to make great stuff for the internet. We are a very philosophical company, so everything we do tries to make the web a more open place. Most of the software we create is open source, which means that it kind of belongs to everyone and anyone can edit it or change it, much like the Wikipedia, but for software. And that's what I plan to continue doing the rest of my life, because I believe as more and more of our lives are influenced by the digital realm, it's important that we see how this works and be able to modify it and change it. to truly be in control of our destiny. In terms of health and wellness, I try to keep myself alive and well so that I can do my best work. Um, I, for much of my 20s, I was really just on the computer. I started WordPress when I was 19. And
Mm.
so I really would just kind of be on a computer for like 12 to 14 hours a day and just coding a lot. And it, I think there was a book I read called Mind Rules
Mm.
by, I want to say it was like a neuroscientist, or it was a great book actually. I recommend it. And the first point in it, I thought, oh, this is great. I'll make my brain better. Brain's so important. That's how I do everything. And the first rule was exercise. I was like, what? What do you mean exercise? I'm not a jock. I don't need to move. I'm like a brain in a vat floating and I do things. And but then it talked about all the benefits to your cognition and thinking that exercise and movement and everything else. And that was the beginning of me starting to see my mind not as a separate thing that floated on the internet, but actually as, an embodied part of the rest of me. And I'm really glad I found that out. And I wish I'd found it out when I was 19, not 29.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you did too, because we definitely need more people like you on the planet. And I think it's really interesting to see kind of the trend how, you know, people in the space who are leaders like yourself in tech are starting to come to this awareness. So I feel like you actually found out pretty early. So I'll like give you a pat on the back for that one, because at 29, I think that's actually a pretty good age to figure this out. I find some of my clients that come to me don't really figure that out until their 50s, and it's a lot harder then. So that's really awesome. I saw on your site that you thank your teachers, which I thought was really interesting because, to be honest, I don't think I've seen that outside of an acknowledgement in a book. And I was just really intrigued by that. And I wanted to ask you why that is, what made you put that in your about section of your site, and also if there were any teachers or maybe even possibly new teachers that have taught you about that concept of taking care of your body, your mind, and your holistic self.
Hmm. Yeah, I just thought of a few names I should probably add to that now. um, I have been trying to practice more gratitude, especially during the pandemic, and just as find them happier and I started thinking about a lot of those teachers were music teachers, and a lot of them when I was younger, and a number of them had passed away actually, and so they just kept popping up for me. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in as I was like thinking of people I was grateful for or who had really influenced me. And particularly, it's funny because I run a company, and so CEO, it's 1,300 people. It's a business thing, but a lot of the lessons I draw on come from music for me,
Mm.
including like how to be in front of an audience, how to breathe, how to how to lead a group of creatives, how to follow as well as lead. Like a lot of that for me, I learned playing in bands. I used to play saxophone. And so, yeah, I was just thinking of those teachers, and especially because I've spent a lot of time this year in Houston, where I'm from, where a lot of those teachers are. So just driving around, going by the old schools, seeing things in the news, sometimes for good or bad reasons. And I went to this summer camp at TSU, Texas Southern University. Had
Mm.
ran a jazz camp every year, and they were hit pretty hard by the floods recently.
Mm.
And so, yeah, just things like that have brought it up to my mind. And so I just added that really a few weeks ago. You're probably the first person to mention it.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. That really inspired me. And it also, just in the little glimpses that I've had in person with you, but also what I have seen of you online, I was like, wow, that's just kind of another example of how humble and considerate you are. And even if that was just like a new practice, I just really wanted to highlight that to you personally, but also for anybody who will be listening, because I just think it's such a great example for all of us to follow. So I'll be doing that too.
But you got me thinking because, you know, post there, those were mostly early, like kind of early 20s and before teachers. And I haven't really thought as much about like the folks who did get me to think more holistically about my body. one I'll mention now just because she comes to mind is a body worker here in, I think she has Korean acupressure, is her modality in San Francisco called Heyman Cho.
Mm.
And I gave a talk at a tech thing in San Francisco, and she walked up and said, "Hey, I loved your talk. It was really inspiring. If you'd ever like a free massage, come by." And I was like, "That sounds strange," but I eventually I went. And yeah, I've kind of seen her now on and off for like probably 12 years.
Wow.
And she would joke, she was like, "Yeah, when I first started working on you, you were like Gumby. Like there was just no muscles anywhere. You're totally flexible. There was nothing." Like most people come in with like knots or something, you had none. But she kind of would push me to like work out and other things. She's very connected. I sometimes use woo woo, not in a entirely pejorative sense, but just for things that we can't entirely explain, or for um, modalities that I don't understand yet. And she was one of the first people like that in my life. And being on the table, we would talk for sometimes several hours at a time. And so there was a lot of discussion that would happen around the things she believed and what I understood or didn't understand.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely consider myself pretty woo-woo, so I get that I would be perceived that way. I get it. And I know a lot of the practitioners out there understand that too. I don't even think it's a bad thing. We're like, we accept that. We're woo-woo. um,
Yeah,
which
I try to embrace my woo side, which is funny because we have a
no,
product
I could
also
tell.
called
I
Woo
could
Commerce. Yeah.
tell. Exactly, exactly. I mean, you also had you were the last person I assume who signed off on having me come and do breath work for a few hundred of your team members. So clearly you got some woo woo in you. But that actually leads me to another question that I don't even have here in my interview questions, and that's I find for a lot of I would say a lot of people who are, more in the tech world or who are very numbers or science driven, that often they need science and data to kind of prove the woo woo's validity,
Mm,
the things that are like unexplainable. And I'm curious for you, what has kind of bridged the gap on some of those modalities? Is it experience? Is it a trusted person giving you a recommendation? Is it that you've read a million books and then you go try something like
mm.
cupping? Like, what has that been for you?
Hmm. Um, I think one thing that tech has going for it, and I use tech kind of in a positive group sense, right? Um, is an open-mindedness. So I'll usually say I'll try anything that doesn't seem like it could potentially be harmful at least once, just to try it out. And then you mentioned experience. Sometimes these things have an effect. And you're like, huh. And the analytical part of my mind then goes to, is it a placebo effect? Is there something embedded in this? And placebo is real, by the way. So I don't
Absolutely.
mean that in a pejorative sense, right?
Totally.
Like mind over matter. So I'm very open to trying things, and I try to try almost everything that seems reasonable. And but I must say, I get very, very excited when science explores these areas and can perhaps find um, isolate the variables for what's having the impact versus what maybe is coming along with the tradition, and if there is a way to expand it or accentuate it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, maybe if you, let's just make it up and say you can isolate the compound that is having some sort of effect. Or if we knew what was really happening
Yeah.
during breath work, or the studies that are done on Wim Hof, or all these sorts of things, to the extent that they expand the edge of our scientific understanding. Hopefully that can mean that they get incorporated. This is happening in an amazing way with psychedelics right now, where we have, you know, very old compounds, molecules that have been used for thousands of years, now in phase 3 medical trials. So there's a point when a couple of years from now, veterans or people with PTSD could be prescribed something like an MDMA, and that could have a really huge impact. So that's an area myself, Tim Ferriss, a few others support the Johns Hopkins Research Center for this. It's, I think, an area that um, as widely as known as it might be, right? Anyone can read Michael Pollan's book. We need the science to validate it and make it something that could be prescribed, something the government can pay for, something that could be legalized.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. That was actually one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. I did hear that you helped support some of that program, that you continue to, and I would love to know what your own personal experiences were that kind of backed up the importance of supporting such a important and impactful program.
Yeah, I think that anyone who explores these things, if you have an ineffable experience, right, something that you can't really describe, um, you know, there is often a desire to understand it better or to share it,
Yeah.
right? And so if you feel like these are medicines that could have a really healing effect on people, or you've seen it in of people you know, and I certainly have people in my life who have overcome some really difficult things, especially around mental health, using some of these things. You know, be it psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA, MDA, toad, whatever it might be. There's a whole menu, but exploring it under the right setting, and that's part of what the science hopes to isolate, that can be super, super powerful. So how do we open that up? How do we make it so it's not needing to happen in the underground, but could actually be part of someone's treatment or something holistically that can be accepted?
Absolutely.
It's starting to happen in other countries. It's starting to happen in the U.S. You know, with the legalization of cannabis. All of these things have a pluses and minuses, a light side and a dark side. And just like any medicine, including like caffeine or theanine or whatever it is, um, there's a moderation to it. So I would love that to be better understood, better explored, and hopefully in a few years, part of what you could be prescribed by your doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big supporter of that as well. I think it's really important that finally there's going to be some science to kind of back these things up. I find one of the things that I've had trouble with personally, and I know a lot of the people in our community who are practitioners, was how to kind of bridge that gap. A lot of us, I'll
Mm.
speak for myself, I come from a more experiential lens, right? So I actually started meditating when I was 4 and
So
doing
cool.
all sorts of mystical and very weird things at a very young age. And I didn't really have the language for my experiences until I started to read more about it and find ways to kind of bridge that gap. And I wanted to actually mention that I read every morning as well. I heard you say that you read this morning, and I think I read
Mhm.
somewhere that you do that. So I'm going to share the 3 books that I'm reading right now. I'm actually
Cool.
reading, do you know who Stan Groff was and is
Of course. Yeah.
still? Yes, of course. He's a
Yeah.
pioneer in breathwork and also in psychedelics. So I'm reading his holotropic breathwork book. I actually learned holotropic breathwork on my own after going to one event and then decided that I just had to practice it until I understood it. I wasn't
Hmm.
able, for various reasons, to get trained at the time, and I was doing energy healing with clients, and I just thought, okay, I'm just going to do this as much as possible, and then with my like old school clients who can trust me, I'm going to try it out on them during the sessions. And I've actually been really surprised in reading this book that a lot of the things that I intuitively understood and practice on myself and then eventually with my students and my clients is what's in this book. But
Hmm.
there's not a lot of, at least so far, there's not a lot of science to prove why you have these kinds of experiences. So I'm really curious. 2 more books, and then I'm going to ask you about what you're reading right now. I'm reading Women Who Run with the Wolves. Have you ever heard of this book?
Hmm.
Oh man. I mean, honestly, it's a Bible for all women, and I think it's a Bible for any man or anyone who wants to understand women, no matter where you are on
Sign
the
me up.
spectrum. And then lastly, I really am reading all 3 of these. I'm reading What to Do When It's Your Turn, and It's Always Your Turn by Seth Godin. Uh,
Oh, nice.
have you ever read this one?
I haven't, but I'm a huge fan of Seth Godin. I've read a lot of his other books, and his
Oh,
blog is just classic.
amazing. He's an icon. So this one's really fun. It's kind of almost like just you could just pick a random page and get what you need for the day, but it's super
Hmm.
inspiring to do first thing in the morning. So that leads me to ask, what are you reading right now?
Seth has an awesome WordPress as well at seth.blog, I believe, or Seth's
Oh, yeah.
blog. And yeah, it's a really, really nice one. And he publishes, I think, pretty much every day. So if you want more Seth Godin, I highly recommend following him. He's an incredible writer and a big inspiration to me when I was starting out with Automatic. Um, Gosh, I don't know what books I can grab. I, I'll tell you what I'm reading, and then I'll grab a few behind me just to like show you some good ones. Okay. Oh, and there's a good one
They
up
look good
there.
and you're reading them. This is nice. I'm inspired right
Well, what I read this morning was something called Broken Stars, which is by the same author as this book, Paper Menagerie, Ken Liu. And it's
now.
a set of science fiction that's been, that's a collection of stories which is entirely translated by, from Chinese, so from
Wow.
Mandarin. And it's really, really fascinating because there's whole genres of science fiction there,
Yeah.
which just don't exist in English. The story I was reading this morning is one in which a common genre that I can't pronounce the word, but is a modern day person is set in an ancient historical time period. And so
Oh,
they get kind of transported back or occupy the body of someone a long time ago, and but they have modern day knowledge, which is always kind of interesting.
wow.
I have two books by David Eagleman here, one that I'm going to read and one that is one of my favorites of all time. It's called
Hmm.
Some is called 40 Tales from the Afterlives, and each one starts out at the moment of the beginning of your afterlife, and
Wow.
it's different. And some are based on quantum mechanics, some are based on, um, yeah, just all, and they're all short stories, and some are just a few pages, and it's incredible. He's normally a science writer. Right? This other book is I believe a neuroscience book, but he does pretty amazing work. And I'll just grab this other one because it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I'm messing up my background though.
No, I love it. It's great.
That's a good one. The Devil to Pay in the Backlands. I'll just let people Google that. But here's my probably most woo-woo one that's here right now. Is a guide to Shaktipat by
Ooh.
Swami Shivam Tirth.
Okay.
Hold that so it focuses. And you see a lot of these are used books or ones I found. Uh, Pretty good. The other woo, I've tried to work on a few woo-woo books per year, and the ones this year, Nada Brahma, The World's Sounds, and Rudolf Steiner, How to Know Higher Worlds,
Mm.
uh, was an interesting one. But The World's Sound, I would say, is the one I recommend the most. Nada
World of
Brahma.
Sound.
The World is Sound,
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
Nada, and then Brahma, B, I forget.
Yeah, we'll find it. I've actually never heard of that one. Why do you recommend that?
Ah, it's actually I was turned on to it by a really amazing gentleman named Alexandre Tanous, who has soundmeditation.com, also on WordPress. I recommend checking it out.
Heard of him, yeah.
And he is probably the best sound practitioner I've ever met, and also one of the greatest, like most knowledgeable musicians I've met. It was interesting. I just ended up next to him randomly at a friend's dinner,
Mhm.
and he's got this wild curly hair, and I was like, he said something like he had like 3 PhDs, and my just kind of spidey sense went off. I was like, people who talk about their PhDs early on are usually not that, or something like that. But then I was like, everything I'd ask him about, because I know a lot about certain types of music, he would know all of that, and then know like 10 levels deeper. I was like, wow, this guy is brilliant. He's amazing, and I started to get more into his work, and he does these really, really incredible sound meditations that also incorporate breath work and other things. And I encourage checking them out.
Oh, amazing. Thank you for that. So I hear that you're going off grid, you're going camping. You're so
Mhm.
lucky. I've been trying for months now. And I really, really understand and practice being connected to the importance of being connected to nature and really being fully in it. And so I'm curious if this is one of the major, I don't know if you would call it this, but self-care tools in your toolkit. And if you could just tell us a little bit more about maybe what self-care looks like to you, and if this is
Mhm.
actually like going off grid is one of the things that you practice regularly.
Yeah. So every year I make some New Year's resolutions, but I also ask people in my life or loved ones to assign ones to me because I'm always curious, like, what are they going to pick for me? And then I usually report back like towards the end of the year. Again, I like things to be very organized. So my mom's this year was to be outside more and
Mm,
be in the outdoors more. So she assigned that to me, and it's been a wild year, and uh, but I've been able to incorporate that. And I would say, particularly in Houston, where it's pretty spread out and people drive, where I was for the first 4 months of the lockdown, it was really, really nice to be able to get out and to parks and other things, like just safely kind of be around. When I came over to San Francisco, one of the things I was looking most forward to is if you drive within a few hours of Houston, you're still in kind of a similar geography or similar temperature, which is usually hot, similar amount of
humidity.
mosquitoes, which is usually a lot. So there's a you're kind of in the same kind of thing unless you drive like a really long way. But in San Francisco, you can drive an hour and be in Redwood Forest. You can be on a beautiful coast. You can go south. You can go into Tahoe for a couple hours to National Forest there. So yeah, I just have a little vehicle that can go kind of off-road, and I've been trying to do so. Now, of course, the fires, which are really tragic, have thrown most of that off. So I was making it out almost every weekend for a while there and haven't in a while. So I don't know exactly where I'm going to go yet, kind of navigating by maps, leaving it unplanned. But southern Utah is looking fairly clear and nice temperate weather. And that's also one of my favorite places in the world. So probably just go explore a bit.
I love that. I love that.
By the way, I'll recommend it might be good for your audience as well. So I have this podcast at distributed.blog that talks about distributed work. I guess I forgot to mention, but our company, everyone works from home even before the pandemic. So we're across 77 countries. When you came to our grand meetup last year, that's really one of the only times, or the only time in the year that we try to bring the whole company together. But we did a post which was basically gathered everyone's tips for self-care in the time of COVID and working from home.
Oh, I love
And so
that.
it's on distributed.blog and it's called 161 Ways to Practice Self-Care While Working from Home. And it's all things that people, my colleagues actually do. And it's a great example where, the collective intelligence is so much greater than any one of us. The people I work with are so smart, so creative. And there's a ton on there that many that I practice. Light a candle, I think was one of the ones I put in there. It's number one on the list. But there's literally dozens and dozens. So if anyone listening to this, like myself, like anyone, is feeling a bit stressed out just by the state of the world and working during that, check out that list. It's got some nice tips.
I love that. If it's easy for you, if you want to pop it into the chat, I can include that
Sure.
in our article. I love that. Yeah, I think self care has never really, I think the way it was branded was almost as though we're a luxury. And now, because the way the world has shifted so much for all of us individually and collectively, I think we understand that it's actually just a part of how we can go from surviving to thriving a little bit more, even when things are a little chaotic around us. So,
Hmm.
definitely share that. What is something actually in terms of health and well-being that you feel like you could use support in? We try to, in this conversation, talk about, not just the things that we do really great at and that we've got, all the right tools in our toolkit on, but also some of the things that we feel like, I could really use support here, specifically through health and wellness. Like, is it sleep or is it focusing or your diet? What's the thing that comes up for you when I ask that?
Hmm. For me, I think a lot about focus. So much of the work I do is deep work. It requires long periods of uninterrupted time. But the nature of being a chief executive in a large company is you're at the service of everyone at the company. And there can be a lot of interruptions. And almost, across 1,300 people, any day of the year, there could be 3 or 4 crises happening for individuals or business ones, because we're in such a large dynamic space with millions and millions of customers. So that is, I think, difficult for me to balance sometimes. So what I'm working personally on the most is creating that space to do what is the more important part of my work, which is often writing, contemplating, thinking about problems, thinking about strategy, which sometimes even doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to have fewer of those days where I'm busy all day, but some really big important thing didn't happen, or I didn't move it forward at all. Health wise, yeah, I feel like I could be better in almost anything. Sometimes I try to forgive myself a little too much if I miss my exercise or meditation or so, finding that balance between self-forgiveness, but also like, cracking the whip a little bit.
Absolutely.
And I also think a lot about for my loved ones, my family, my friends, how I can be supportive of them and their journeys, you know. And it's so tough to balance that because obviously what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for anyone else. But also just, if you can share knowledge or practices that worked for you, could that help someone else? And I've seen that happen sometimes. But there's also often so much resistance or there's a mental aspect to it as well.
Yeah.
So that's something I think about a lot, which was part of what you do every day, which is help people. So helping people who want to be helped is also different from helping people who might not be open to it yet.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I've learned to stop trying to help people who don't want to be helped. I finally figured that out. Maybe this year I finally figured it out. We'll see. But that's a really big, interesting thing that you just mentioned that I think will segue to the other question I had for you because, truly one of the things that I found both personally as a daughter, as a friend, as a partner, as a colleague, that really, especially as a healer, you learn that only those who are ready are the ones that you can help. It's
Mm,
maybe people don't have to believe in what I do, but as long as they're open to it, that's the only thing that's not needed for me to be able to facilitate any sort of journey that can be supportive of their
mm,
well-being. But if someone is closed and says I don't want to change or I don't want to talk about this thing, then I finally have come to a deeper commitment to honoring that and letting that be something that I'm
mm,
not judging or like, but wait, don't you understand? It's okay, as you wish. I support you. I'm here when you're ready. I think one of those things that I had to really learn was this idea of like I needed to stop pushing meditation on people and pushing
mm,
breath work and like the importance of that in my life and hoping that people would get that. I had to kind of like quell the evangelist in me and finally just say,
mm,
I'll just be that. And if anybody's interested, I'm over here. So I'm really curious. I saw that you do meditate on the Calm app. I think I heard that you invested in that as well. So
mhm,
obviously you understand and promote meditation. I totally don't meditate the most that I would like to. Frankly, I'd like
mm,
to do that for a few hours a day, and I don't always do that. Sometimes I do.
mhm.
What is your meditation practice like personally?
Hmm. I use apps for almost everything. So like I work out with the Fitbot app. I'd say the Calm app kind of got me into meditation after, many false starts. I also use the Sam Harris app. I really enjoy Waking Up, I believe it's called, is really nice. I've done some other kind of experiments. Also, the reason I have the Shakti Path book is one of the quarantine things I did that was kind of interesting, actually twice, was kind of a remote meditation. A Shaktipat guru in India who we would do twice a day meditations and then satsangs to discuss things. And so it was very interesting for me because it was more meditating than I normally do. It was a few hours a day. And also I found myself so much more judgmental of myself that week because I think it was like the third or fourth day and I found myself just being short. Like I had a short kind of fuse in a discussion I was having. I got so mad at myself because, like, gosh, I've meditated like 10 hours in the past 3 days. What is going on? Like, I feel like I'm worse than I normally am,
Oh
and
no.
it was so interesting. Um, Done a few other things. It was funny. I was recently talking to actually, my first girlfriend in high school, a woman named Sunaina who lives in LA, gave me this meditation book when I was like 18. And I probably didn't meditate again I never meditated then. And it was like literally like 15 years later that I really kind of got into things. And I found the book and it had like all her notes in it and things. And I was like, I reached out because we're still friends. And I was like, wow, Thank you so much. Like you were really ahead of the curve there for me, and I wasn't ready yet. I didn't realize
Yeah.
how great this information you're sharing with me, and I had to rediscover it myself so many years later. And I do that all the time. It's funny. There's this beautiful space in Houston called the Rothko Chapel,
Mm,
which is this beautiful meditative space that
mm,
has, if you're familiar with the artist Mark Rothko, does these
mm.
kind of large color field paintings. And it's, I think, 14 of these super large paintings, 10, 12, 14 feet tall. And it's just kind of a hexagon space with some benches in the middle. So it's called a chapel, but it's really this beautiful meditative space. And it's interesting, not because his paintings sell for hundreds of millions of dollars each, which they do, so it is unique in that regard, but just there's so much, it's a powerful space. I sometimes call it, hear the concept of thin spaces. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a Celtic idea, like places where the barrier between heaven and earth is thinner.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've ever been in the mountains, it felt like a thin space. I think the Rothko Chapel is a thin space. And I've gotten really into it the past 3 years, and I'm like, I'm a donor, all these sorts of things for this. They're rebuilding it right now. So I've gotten really into the space. And my mom was like, yeah, I used to take you there in a stroller. And I thought I discovered it like as an adult. I'm like, yeah, I found this
Oh,
cool thing. And my mom was like, I took you there like all the time.
oh my
And I
gosh,
just had no recollection, which was really
that's
funny.
beautiful. That clearly made an impression on your subconscious mind, though, for that, and even just
Yeah.
connecting with your mom, it seems like you must be close to her. That
So
that
maybe
seems
what
like,
you're doing is planting seeds.
yeah,
When you say
totally,
this and someone's like, no, but you planted the seed and that seed could sprout a
totally.
year, 10 years, a lifetime away, who knows?
Totally. No, absolutely. And that's really the hope. And I think, kind of one of the things that I found really interesting in some of the wording that you used or the company has used with automatic is the word democratizing. And
Mhm.
that's actually a word that we've used around democratizing wellness and healing. And I think one of the through lines of that is that we don't need to go and get people to understand. We just put out the information and we put it out in the most accessible and inclusive way possible so that if anybody would like it, they can receive it in whatever way is right for them. And
Hmm.
so, you know, one of the things that's really interesting about the word democratizing is that I've actually gotten a lot of pushback for that word. I've been told that it's too political. And
Hmm.
in my mind, it was never a political statement, but like one that I appreciated, kind of had a little bit of like, what's that about? So one of my last questions for you is, what does democratizing look like for you, especially in this era? And I've noticed and personally feel like diversity and inclusion and representation is important to you, just in my interactions with you. What is it that's on your heart right now in that space and with that word as kind of the symbol?
Yeah, that's a good question. We adopted it really early on, probably in like 2003, 2004. And I have seen it, what I would say, misused sometimes. As people talk about democratizing ice cream, and they just mean they want to sell a lot of ice cream or something. Like, I feel like you can misuse it, but in the sense that you said, I think it's exactly right, which is this idea of opening something up. You can think of it in socialist terms as well, like putting the means of production in the hands of the people. For us, it means we want anyone in the world to have access to the best publishing software and commerce software, regardless of their economic ability, regardless of what language they speak, regardless of their technical ability. We want to make it really easy to use. And so, this sort of accessibility of the tools is something that's possible in the digital realm in a completely different way than it is in the physical realm. And when you work in the world of atoms, you typically have economics of scarcity. If you have the land, I can't also own that land. Or if you're reading the book right now, I can't be reading the book at the same time. But in digital, we can have economics of abundance, where the incremental copy of something is effectively free, and it actually gets cheaper all the time as bandwidth, computing, everything gets so much faster and cheaper. If you're familiar with Moore's Law,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Moore's Law is this idea that every 18 months, effectively like the specifically number of transistors on a chip, but effectively think of it like the speed or cost of things kind of halves every 18 months. And that's continued now for decades. So you get this economics of abundance. And in fact, you have the opposite, where for something like a WordPress, you get what's called a network effect, where it becomes actually more valuable the more people use it. So the
Mm,
more copies there are of WordPress, the better it is. The more people write software for it, the more people that understand it, the more people that teach it, the more people develop it. So there's these kind of virtuous cycles that happen. And the other part of to me, democratizing is open source. So in the US, we have the Bill of Rights, right? It's the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that guarantees certain inalienable rights. And the Declaration of Independence, we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not the right to be happy, but the right to pursue happiness. Um, in software, we are bound by agreements, and usually it's like a several hundred page thing we click through when we're signing up for something. No one reads it. We actually have an Easter egg in ours that you can find some barbecue hidden under our terms of service, but no, effectively no one reads them, and you're actually signing away many key rights, including sometimes the right to a trial. Often when these agreements you're agreeing to an arbitration panel or other things. The other thing that we're becoming more cognizant of, and there's a new documentary on Netflix about this called The Social Dilemma, is you're often signing away your data, you're signing away your privacy. We're trading a lot of freedom for convenience. And as I think one of the founding fathers said, those who do that deserve neither. Or I think he said freedom for security deserve neither. So also in all the software we create, we try to build in this Bill of Rights. And the license we use called the GPL has these four freedoms attached to it. So any software that's under the GPL license, you have the freedom to use it for any purpose. So knowing I can't say what you can or cannot use WordPress for. You can literally use it for anything, good or bad. You have the freedom to see how the software works. You have the freedom to modify the software. And then you have the freedom to distribute those modifications. So these four freedoms are a cool hack essentially, because if you have these built in, the software belongs just as much to you as it does to me. And I believe if we're going to have a truly free society in the ideals of, you know, the idealized version of America, which of course is far from what it actually is, but like what we want to build towards, we need this for our digital lives as well. So my life's purpose is to try to create as much of that in the world as possible. I also recognize that most people don't know about this and don't care about it, right? They'll just click through that terms of service. So in order to get as much open source in the world as possible, we need to create the best user experiences. We need to create the software that's most compelling, that has the biggest value proposition, that solves your problems. Because people don't wake up saying like, hey, I want to use WordPress today. They wake up saying, hey, I want to publish something to an audience, or I want more visitors to my store, or I want to sell something online. It's a means to an end. And so we need to both make the software as friction-free and invisible as possible to allow you to express yourself, right? We make canvas, we make paint. The point isn't the paint or the canvas, it's what you create with it. So I apologize because that was a long answer, but I'm really into this. And I think that it's interesting to apply those ideals or those concepts of open source, of democratizing to anything. To give you a silly example, it started to happen with barbecue. It used to be, I don't know if you like barbecue at all. Barbecue used to be quite mediocre almost everywhere, even in Houston, which is in Texas. All the good barbecue was in Austin and San Antonio and the countryside. But some of the pit masters started to share how they make the great barbecue. And they started to write books. Franklin's, if you've heard of it in Austin, is one of the most famous. Aaron Franklin started to publish some really amazing secrets of barbecuing that people hadn't really published before. They've been kind of closely guarded. And now you can go almost anywhere in the world, Seoul, Paris, Houston, and have some of the best barbecue you've ever had. And it's kind of amazing. And so imagine if, you're reading the work of, is it Stan Groff? He wrote that book. How many thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions perhaps have read that book and been inspired? You're going to take that information, you're going to build on it. And there'll be your version of maybe something you figure out or some way you advance the state of the art. If you can share that, that's incredible. And it kind of moves humanity forward in a way that wouldn't otherwise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I truly believe that democratizing anything is actually really about moving our consciousness, our civilization forward and
Mm,
opening it up so that more people can actually benefit from that forward trajectory.
mm.
I
And
have
information is the most powerful there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I started Wellness Official. That,
Mm,
that exact point that you made in regards to everything from barbecue to how that goes to open source platforms is in many ways why I started Wellness Official years ago. I really just
mm,
I wanted to see a world of wellness and healing where there were more people that looked like me, but also being that I'm very, very multicultural in my background, everything from having family from Texas and Oklahoma who were settlers and Sooners to
mm,
my Panamanian roots who were once slaves, but also British family. The list goes on and on. I really wanted to be able
mm.
to see every aspect of myself personified in the healing space because it really made my life what it is today. And I knew that that wouldn't be possible if everybody wasn't at that table. So everybody needed to be at that table. And how would I do that? It had to be a community both online and in person. And I'm super grateful to you and everybody at WordPress because you guys are really helping to make that dream come true in a real way. So it's actually a pretty beautiful full circle experience to have this conversation with you now, given how we met, and then to be able to share this philosophy in the wellness and healing space because of what you've created. So thank you for that.
Oh, it's an honor to help. So really glad it's finally getting out there and can't wait to see what happens next with it, right? This is just another chapter on what I hope is a very, very long book of your work.
Thank you. I have one more question before we go, and I promise you it'll be really quick. I don't know if you remember that I went to high school in Houston. I went to high school at Dulles. I don't know if you know that in Sugar Land, Texas.
Yeah.
And I know that Houston is a big part of your story, and it feels like you really identify with the city itself. And for
Mhm.
me, even though I wasn't there very long, it actually really shaped my spiritual understanding and my worldview in terms of health and fitness and then religion and spirituality. I actually became a born again Christian for 6 years while I was in high school and college. And that's
Wow.
after being a Wiccan when I moved there from Boulder, Colorado. So very interesting
Yeah.
train of events.
I appreciate your open-mindedness.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to a lot of things. And to be honest with you, Christianity and my understanding of it, although I don't practice it in the more secular way, has really been a huge part in how I think I'm able to speak to more people who do understand
Mm.
Christianity as their principal value system. So I'm just really curious, aside from the Wiccan Christianity part, what is it about Houston that is so strong and a part of your identity? What does it mean to you? And how did it inform your worldview?
Hmm. You know, you said it was going to be quick, so I'll try to keep it not too long. But I consider myself so lucky to have grown up there. Yeah, as uh, Warren Buffett talks about the ovarian lottery. You know, I happen to be born to parents I had, which I consider myself very lucky, and in Houston, which I think is the future of America in a lot of ways. It is incredibly multicultural in a lot of the ways that you talked about. I went to all public schools my whole life, actually, all the way through University of Houston, and had really good experiences in each. You know, not every teacher was perfect, but like the way that people connected and the way the neighborhoods were very mixed and the way that, you know, people would create friendships across like lines where they might be divisions in other places in the world or country was really viable. And for me, also the music and jazz part. It's not well known, but Houston actually has one of the better jazz scenes in the world, actually. There's a huge connection between Houston, New York, Houston, Louisiana. A lot of jazz musicians are from there, like Robert Glasper, Kendrick Scott. Like there's so many that come out of there. And so Houston just has a really good jazz scene. So I think I had some of the best in the world teachers on the jazz side. And jazz is such, yes, some say is the first American art form, truly American art form created here. And so being able to learn that history, that tradition, be passed on by some amazing practitioners, know the lineage of some of my teachers, to some of the jazz greats, and just feel a strong connection there. And then just the soul of it. Jazz is about improvisation. It's about blues. It's about struggle. It's about politics. Jazz is very political.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that, man, I feel so lucky that I went through. Now going back, I think Houston's just the most underrated place, and that everyone knows Austin's cool, everyone knows Portland's cool, but people sleep on Houston. You know, all my friends are moving to Austin. All the tech folks are, you know, Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, Elon Musk. They're all in Austin. But Houston, I think they're missing out. Not that Austin is bad. My sister lives in Austin, but Houston just has so much more. Where Austin's a relatively small city, you know, million-ish people. Houston is 4, 5, 6 times that in the metropolitan area. So you get some of the, what you get in LA or New York, where there's like a neighborhood for everything. There's a restaurant for everything. The food is such an amazing way to share and learn a culture. So there's a ton of that. And then just nice people. I guess that's the final thing I'll say. I've always, all your preconceptions about, you know, what Texas is or anything like that will be challenged in Houston. So I
Mm-hmm.
encourage people to go and check out the Rothko Chapel, check out the art there, the Damon Hill. You know, when it's open again, check out the ballet, check out the symphony, go to the parks, see all the trees. When you fly into Houston, all you see is trees as far as the eye can see. People don't think about that. They think of the freeways, they think of the strip malls, but special place. And it's awesome that you have a connection there. If I hope you have a chance to return, especially when things are more normal.
Same, same. Well, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you've got a lot to do before you go into nature. So, yeah, really appreciate it.
Glad we're able to catch up.